Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Participants series. Today, we're going to talk with Jeri about her experience participating in a clinical research study, blogging about that experience, and unexpectedly gaining a significant internet audience. Welcome, Jeri. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about your experience.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jeri, you were interviewed by reporters at the Wall Street Journal in 2014 about your popular blog that described in detail your experience participating in a clinical trial. Can you tell us what kind of study you participated in, why you started the blog, and what you hoped the blog would accomplish?
Sure. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, or MS, in 1999. I got an appointment in 2007 with a new doctor. He happened to be a primary investigator for a study testing a new pill form of treatment for MS. And up until then, all the treatments were by injection. So I was very interested. And it was a comparator trial, meaning there was no placebo, and I would be either on the investigational drug or on a standard of care drug he would be recommending I switch to anyway if I chose not to join. So I took home the informed consent form and read it over carefully before deciding to join the study. But I was a real worrier and I had no idea what participating would be like. Everything I could find about clinical trials online at the time was from a researcher's point of view and not that of a participant. So I decided if I couldn't find it on the internet, maybe I should blog about it so others could see what it was like from my perspective. And by blogging, I hope to share with family and friends and maybe others with MS who are interested what it was like to be in a study.
What did you write about in your blog?
Well, I wanted to document everything from my first person perspective, all the fears and anxieties I felt about upcoming study visits, and then what actually transpired. I was trying to give others the idea that if someone like me who is terrified of everything could do it, then maybe participating is really not so bad. It was frustrating to me that I couldn't find any participant perspective to learn from in order to calm my own anxieties about the unknown. So I wanted to put that out there for others. And I would also blog about my everyday life and how I was not experiencing any new MS relapses. So my body was healing and I was regaining my quality of life a little in different ways, like feeling my feet again or not being dizzy all the time.
Your blog gathered a community of people with shared experiences. Tell us about that. What did the community talk about? Did you think your blog played a role in bringing this community together?
I met lots of other patient bloggers and people with MS who were interested in my experience, and we began having conversations within the comments section of my posts. Yes, I do think that my blog brought us together. I don't think we could have connected if it didn't exist, because it was through my blog that I discovered people were either already participating in the same study or they were inspired to join the study by how well I seemed to be doing, both health-wise and in handling the experience I had been so afraid of. We talked about how our friends and families couldn't really relate to the experience, but because we were all undergoing the same battery of tests and procedures, we found a kind of camaraderie and we were a community. We also explored topics like what we thought of our study teams, how far we had to travel to participate, how we felt about having MRIs, and how our randomization day went when we had to stay for a 6-hour observational period. After a time, we took our conversations from the public comments on my blog to a more private space where we felt more comfortable sharing information.
Could you say a bit more about why you felt more comfortable continuing your conversations through a private channel?
Yes, so it was important for us as our small group of participants that as we began sharing more personal details about our experiences, that we felt safe sharing those. And I think we were all beginning to realize that others were following along when it came to the blog, and maybe we didn't want everyone reading all those details.
Your blog also received attention from the pharmaceutical industry. Talk to me a little about your invitation to speak at one of their conferences. Why was there this interest to invite you? What did you talk about? Did you learn about any concerns that the pharmaceutical industry or researchers had about research participants using social media?
It was sometime in late 2011 when I was contacted by someone who wanted to interview me about my blog. It turned out to be a pharmaceutical executive who had been following my blog. We spoke by phone and discussed how the world of research was changing and patients were in more control of information now with the internet and what implications that might have for conducting clinical trials. He wanted to understand what my perspective was from a participant point of view when it came to meeting others in the same study, comparing notes, and even how my blog might be influencing readers' decision to join the study. Prior to the internet, study sites were able to effectively prevent these conversations occurring by scheduling study visits so participants wouldn't meet in the waiting room. So now researchers knew it would be impossible to keep people from finding each other on the internet and interacting. And that's why there's so much interest in my interview at the conference.
Circling back to your interview with the Wall Street Journal, you mentioned that you now have more reservations about openly sharing information around clinical trial participation. Could you tell us why?
At the time I wrote my blog, I looked at it as a space for me to share what was happening with my friends and family, along with people I knew in the MS community. I didn't really realize the reach my words would have and how many people would end up following my journey. I wanted other people who were wondering what it was like to be in a study to have that patient perspective. But I've wondered since that time if something had gone wrong with my study or if I would have had a negative experience and blogged about it. Would that change somebody's mind? Would they maybe be more afraid of research because of my bad experience? Maybe my overwhelmingly positive experience may have led someone to not fully weigh those pros and cons of joining their study. If I were to do it over again, I would be more keenly aware of my potential audience.
You shared some really good suggestions about best practices and considerations for research participants using social media. Do you have any suggestions for what researchers and funders can do to lessen any negative impact participant social media use may have on a clinical trial? Are there things that researchers and funders can do to make research participation a more positive and constructive experience?
So there were a couple of times during our study when a participant who none of us knew had a serious reaction or complication. The study site would make all the participants aware of what was going on, but our private space allowed us a place to interact and sort of process the news together and provide emotional support to those of us feeling anxious or overwhelmed by the news. If it weren't for our private group, I often wonder if I would have left the study because I was scared about those reports. I feel that if a drug company were to create a private social space for participants to interact anonymously, there would be no reason for them to take the initiative to create these spaces for themselves. Creating an online private forum that is monitored by someone associated with the study who can provide real-time factual information about the study would be a great approach. The sponsor could provide resources about what to expect during the study, maybe videos that demonstrate the type of procedures you'll undergo, and even provide a lay summary once the study is over. In the end, I feel like it's all about information, and knowledge is power. Participants should be valued as contributing members of a study team. If you approach your participants as a partner in research and explain to them how sharing experiences in a careless manner could impact research negatively, I believe participants will have a greater respect for the process and be less apt to jeopardize the study by sharing details maybe they shouldn't. People who want to participate in research are doing so not just out of altruism, but also for the possible benefits to their own health. And I can't imagine anyone would join a study and then deliberately compromise the outcome. So it's a matter of educating people about sharing and providing that safe place for participants to come together in a carefully monitored space to create that kind of camaraderie they're looking for. because participation can be lonely and isolating, but it doesn't have to be. I think pharmaceutical companies should provide educational materials at the time someone signs up for a study about how and when to share about your research experience and why it's important for the integrity of the study. Let participants know what a valuable member of the team they are, and just as with the research team, they all must do their part to make the study a success.
Jeri, thank you for spending time with us today to talk about your experience as a research participant and what you learned about the role social media can play in the research participants' experience. Your input was meaningful, and your insights will help other research participants recognize the impact and significance they have on clinical trials.
Thank you so much for this opportunity